Is this God's judgment? Well, Pope Francis doesn't believe so. But first, we start with our mission.
With firm faith, I believe and profess everything that the Catholic Church teaches. But for many reasons, the fullness of that message hasn't been getting out lately. What if we, together, set out to learn the faith, to live the faith, and to share this faith, like missionaries of old? What would the world look like in 100 years?
So Pope Francis said that this is not the time of God's judgment, but of our judgment. What does that mean? Welcome, I'm Brad Shapezi, and I hate to appear to be wavering on this issue. But after discussing the end of the world and the chastisement all last week, this weekend I finally got a chance to get outdoors. It was a beautiful weekend here in Tennessee, a beautiful, beautiful spring weather. And I spent the whole weekend working in the garden and playing with the dogs. Now, I'm from South Florida. I hate the winter. It's been miserable. It's been wet. It's just been awful. And to finally get out there in the sun and to kind of get all of this stuff off of my mind, it's almost, I was thinking while I was out there, it's almost like this is a bad dream, like it's not really happening. And while I was out there, I thought, what will we think if everything goes back to normal? What will we think a year from now when we look back on all of these things? Like when you look back and you see, for example, these videos, a year from now, will we think that we were all just a little crazy for all of this end of the world talk? Now, in that same frame of mind, the Holy Father, at his papal blessing on Friday, said that this is not the time of God's judgment. He said, "You are calling on us to seize this time of trial as a time of choosing. It's not the time of your judgment, but of our judgment. A time to choose what matters and what passes away. A time to separate what is necessary from what is not. It's a time to get our lives back on track with regard to you, Lord, and to others." And this got me to thinking, because this week I mentioned that I wanted to look at the story of Noah and the flood, and the Holy Father has given me a great jumping off point with where he's going with this. So what does he mean when he says that it's not the time of your judgment, but of our judgment, a time to choose what matters? Now, have you ever had one of those discussions with an atheist where they reference the flood story and they call God a genocidal maniac because he wipes everyone out? Have you ever had one of those conversations? And in their defense, I think in their minds, it seems like a very reasonable conclusion to come to, because, we call Hitler or Stalin genocidal maniacs because they literally wipe out populations of people. So an atheist, maybe they're just applying that same formula to God, which is, obviously not appropriate, but they're applying that formula to God in stories like the flood and other stories in the Bible. But when they do that, I think they're missing two very important points. First, and I think this is what the Holy Father is saying, Scripture says at the time of the flood that the wickedness of man was great, and every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil, continually evil. It says the wickedness of man was great. Now, maybe the Holy Father is saying to us that our wickedness is great. And I don't think atheists would deny that, because they admit that same point in their own words when they ask us frequently, why does God allow so much suffering? They see the wickedness. They see the suffering that it causes. They recognize this metaphysical reality. Now, so the Holy Father is saying to us that our wickedness is great, and it's time for us to choose what matters. And in looking at the story of the flood, those people had this same moment to choose. Now, they did not respond. So how will we respond? And if we don't respond, how can we expect that God will not judge us? You can't have it both ways. You can't say in one breath, Why doesn't God stop wickedness and the suffering that it causes? And then in the next, when he does stop it, call him a genocidal maniac. Maybe you missed this important fact, because I know that over the course of the 70s and the 80s, there were a lot of pictures of a really happy, friendly Jesus. And I know maybe the Christian message somehow during that time period got confused with pacifism and kindness and sharing. Like Christian morality is somehow interchangeable with the Care Bears or hippies. Now that God, the imaginary friend God, it's easy to deny that he exists. But don't be confused. God exists. Right and wrong exists. And God will judge us. And we will not rob him of his right to judge us with pithy little comments like God is a homicidal maniac. No, God is a judge. And the people of Noah's time were judged and they were found guilty. Don't be confused. We don't have the right to wickedness. God did not put us here for the purpose of hedonism. And you might say that I would never follow a God who would do that. Well, okay. That's what I think the Holy Father's saying. Now is the time to choose what matters, to get our lives back on track. You don't have to. No one is forcing you. No one forced the people of Noah's time either. This is the answer to the atheist question. Why does God allow suffering? They set up this argument. You probably heard this. If God is all-knowing, all-powerful, and all-good, then he would put an end to all suffering. And since suffering exists, therefore God does not. If God delays in his judgment, it's not because he doesn't exist. The delay is for the purpose of mercy, for penance. Remember what we said last week, that a chastisement is penance for really stubborn people. Don't ignore this time of mercy. Don't waste this time binging on Netflix. Because this time of mercy, whether it's 1 month or 1 year or 100 years, this time of mercy will end. And then will begin the time of judgment. And when that time begins, how we have formed our hearts, how people have formed themselves. We spoke last week of how so many in our society have formed themselves in materialism. And whatever we are, we will bring that before the judgment seat of God. And how will we respond when we are all standing there before God? What will that look like? How will we respond to that moment? In terror? In anger? In love? In gratitude? I hesitate to make this analogy because it's awful, but unfortunately it works in our overly political society, a society that is absent of fathers, so we look to politicians for fatherhood, for guidance, and for our well-being, as the stimulus package from last week demonstrates completely. So I'm going to use politicians as an analogy for Judgment Day. Now, I would like think of you and a friend who has a completely opposite political ideology from you, whether you're conservative and they're liberal or whatever. And you both are together watching the president, whether that's Trump or Obama or Bush, whoever. They're making a huge speech announcing some government, whatever. Just fill in the blanks here, just to make the analogy. But the point is that both you and your friend would dramatically have different responses to this speech. One of you might be elated, while the other might be enraged. And what's the difference? It's not the president. Both of you are listening to one and the same speech. How can each of you have such a dramatically different response? It's in your formation. Each of you have been formed in different ideologies, and you have embraced different values based on those ideologies. Again, it's a terrible analogy, but in an unfortunately similar way, on Judgment Day, some will experience terror and fear, while others will experience love and gratitude. Now, we just celebrated the Feast of the Annunciation when the angel declared the Word became flesh, and then Our Lady went in haste to declare the Word became flesh. And from there, the apostles went throughout the world to declare that the Word became flesh. And from there, the church, through the ages, has declared that the Word became flesh. And to this gospel message, how have you responded? Have you received those sacraments which flow from the church and the apostles and Our Lady, from the angel's message, in which the Word becomes flesh? Have you received those sacraments in which the Word becomes flesh? Because those who have been formed in this sacramental mystery, when on Judgment Day the Word become flesh is revealed once again, those formed in this sacrament will be prepared. And conversely, those who have been formed in wickedness, how will they respond? Those who, instead of receiving the church's sacraments, instead established alternative sacraments or anti-sacraments of death and hedonism. You know what I'm talking about. Will they, who have received those sacraments, who have been formed in those sacraments, will they have oil for their lamps? So before we get carried away with crazy talk about the end of the world, I think the Holy Father just wants to refocus us on what is happening now and what it means. And we should use this time to reject wickedness, like the Holy Father says, to get our lives back on track. Tomorrow, we'll look at why the Holy Father is saying this now. Until then, check out Friday's video where we discuss why is God doing this. Click here to watch that. And remember, you can't give what you don't have. So we're here to help you to learn the faith, to live the faith, and to love the faith, so that you can get out there and share the faith. So how can we discern if this is actually God bringing chastisement on us? And if it is, why would he do such a thing?